Well, hey everyone, welcome to the future of pre-licensing education. Cindy and I are overwhelmed at the number of people that have registered for this webinar. My name is Barb Gavitt. I am the Vice President of Product Development and Education with AD Banker & Company, and I am the co-chair of the SILA Education and Training Subgroup Sets. What is it called? Cindy, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Cindy Davidson. I'm the Director of Insurance Content and Compliance at ExamFX, longtime SILA member, education trustee on the SILA Inc. board, and co-chair with Barb on this subgroup. So happy to welcome everybody today.
Next slide. Let's introduce you to our panel of regulators. So we're really excited to be able to share this webinar with you. For those of you that do attend the SILA annual conference, you're used to our panel of regulators. So we thought that we would bring this to you via webinar. So the select few, we wish that we could have everyone on our webinar today, but we were only able to invite a few regulators with us today. So we've got Jeff Boffman from Washington, Rachel Chester from Rhode Island, Randall Evans from Texas, Lori Gazer from Louisiana, Christina Hunter from North Carolina, Holly Kinney and Dawn Ward from California, Kevin Schlotman from Nebraska, and Richard Tozer from Virginia, who have joined us today. So those are that's the regulator panel that we have. Next slide. And now Cindy is going to educate us on some history before we jump into our panel.
They ask the OG, right? I get to give
That's
a little
right.
bit of.
You were there, you lived there.
I was there, right? I was definitely a spectator, if not a participant. So here's where we are with talking about pre-licensing education requirements versus exam prep. Right now we have, it's about half and half. So we have 25 states who impose some kind of pre-licensing education requirements. So you have to, an applicant has to do some number of hours of PLE before they sit for the exam. And then there's 26 jurisdictions, I'm counting DC, that do not impose a pre-licensing education requirement. People still do pre-licensing education. We might call it exam prep, but you can't just walk in and take the life and health exam. Well, you can, but you're probably not going to pass, right? So people do some sort of exam prep on their way to the state exam. Well, that's kind of the state breakdown, and I can give us next slide a little history on how we got here. So the uniform licensing standards showed up about 20 years ago in response to Gramm-Leach-Bliley, which kind of forced states to get to a state of uniformity or more likely to be the very least reciprocity with regard to producer licensing. The way that it reads in the uniform licensing standards, and this is where we landed 20 years ago, was that you don't have to require pre-licensing education. But if you do, the right number is 20 hours per line of authority. So that's how it is codified in the Model Act. 20 hours is the right number for life, and 40 hours is the right number for life and health. I think it's important to remember that the focus back then, because things were all over the place, the focus back then was to make sure that we're not putting additional requirements on people who are changing states or who are non-residents. So that was kind of the focus at the time. This has stayed pretty stable over time. There, in the past 10 years, I think there's been 3 states that eliminated their pre-licensing education, and those were Nebraska, Nevada, and Rhode Island. No states have implemented a new education requirement in the last 10 years. So yeah, that's where we are now. Next.
You're muted, Barb.
Sorry. How long have we been doing this? 3 years now. Before we begin with the regulator panel, I just want to let everyone know that we are not going to be taking any questions for the regulators. We don't have time, and we've also sent these questions to the regulators in advance. You know, some of these regulators have had to had their responses approved, so we're not going to be able to take any questions on the fly. So just to let you know that we're not going to be taking these any questions through chat. But Cindy and I do want to let you know that this is the first webinar that we're offering on this topic, but we do expect and plan on offering an additional webinar, if not, you know, more than one. Sometime later this summer, we do plan on having an additional webinar, and we also expect to talk about this topic at the conference in October. So at the end of the session, when we're all finished with our regulator session, we are going to ask you to hop on the chat and provide us with some suggestions, some questions that you may have, some things that we can address on a future webinar. So just to kind of give you that heads up right up front. All right, next slide. All right, we are going to start with our friend in Washington, Jeff Boffman. So the first question that we have for Jeff, what is the history or philosophy behind pre-licensing education requirements in Washington?
Wow, I sound like I'm behind a college lectern. What's the history and philosophy? Really simply, Washington's always had a 20-hour pre-license education requirement, but it was previously split 16 hours for general knowledge and 4 for laws and rules. We updated to 20 hours with no split and changed to a 1-part exam in 2015. And Washington is a state that's scheduled to request legislation next January to drop the pre-license education requirement.
So there's a bomb. Nice. See what you get to hear when you're on these SILA webinars?
Coming soon.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the reasons for making that making that decision, and what process did your state go through to come to this decision?
Well, this has not been something we did just on the fly. I mean, this has been the result of like years of conversations with both regulators individually and through the producer licensing working group and producer licensing task force with education providers, and trying to get their perspective on what the possible impacts were if we decided to go down this road. And the results of that analysis came out to show a couple of things. One, as for the regulators on here, you'll note this is no big surprise. There's no significant difference nationally in first-time pass rates between the states that do require pre-license education and those that don't. That was an eye-opener. The test will still remain the qualifier to obtaining a license, not completing PLE. Providers will still be able to market their materials, since knowledge being tested on the exam is not intuitive. For example, in Washington, the OIC is just not going to provide oversight on the provider or the material contents, and the school's performance is going to determine how much business they get from the industry and not be determined by a state requirement. Oversight is another big concern of ours, where we're one of the few states that do not charge for education courses, providers, whatever else, and that includes PLE. So our staff is required to review and approve providers and courses, and our statutes don't go far enough to suspend a provider for their school's poor performance or poor pass rate. So from that standpoint, we thought there might be a good time to get out. For most of our local providers, not the national providers, they wanted to debate the hour requirement. We look at the OIC, we look at it as 20 hours as the minimum. They look at it as the maximum. They're not teaching one iota longer than 20 hours. And they also wanted to argue about the amount of topics on the exam being too much to teach in the required number of hours. So the last consideration has been sort of recently when when PLE surfaced at the NEIC, with this being the PLE being a discussion as possible, rubbing up against diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's something we'll be discussing, I'm sure, at the PLTF.
All right, so speaking of pass rates, and you said that I know you've done research on this. So, and I know that you do look at pass rates. So what is the importance and usefulness of the license exam pass rates? So for example, is that data just informational? Is it important for identifying any trends, or does it affect your education or examination policy?
Well, Barb, it's both important and useful as a method to monitor your first time pass rates and the performance of your contracted exam providers, as well as the schools. You know, per the state licensing handbook, if your pass rate falls below 60 or above 80, your exam should be reviewed, and we review our exams every year.
Sure. And you mentioned that you don't have the ability to for providers, you can't do anything if providers have low pass rates, but
Correct.
as far as looking at the exam itself,
Sure.
That's kind of a qualifier for looking at, the
Absolutely.
statistics. Right. Lastly, have you noticed the number of applicants trending up or down? And how does this impact education or pass rates, if at all?
Well, in Washington, as I think most regulators have been noticing over the last several years, there's been a dramatic increase in licensing. In Washington, this was kind of a surprise. Our resident licensees have increased by 38%. However, and that's over the last 5 years. However, it doesn't keep pace with what we've seen on the national level with the other non-residents, where those folks, those applicants and licensees have risen 74% over the same time frame. So right now we're at about an 82-18 split between residents and non-residents. We have the vast majority of our licensees are resident, and we don't examine, or we don't require exams for any non-resident license. So the percentage increase doesn't really affect our resident licenses, the pass rate, or education.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
All right. Next slide. Let's go to Rhode Island. Welcome, Rachel Chester.
Hi, I just want to make sure you can hear me because I had to restart and I just got back on. So I'm sorry.
We can hear you.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I sort of missed any introduction into how you were going to be asking these questions. So
I was just talking about how wonderful you are. So
oh, okay,
I just
great.
missed that. No, I just introduced your state. So we'll just kick it off with the first question. So what is the history or philosophy behind pre-licensing education requirements? So Cindy mentioned that you were a state that did have pre-licensing and that you did drop it. So, kind of share with us, if you will, what the philosophy is behind that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So it's been a little over 10 years since Rhode Island eliminated the pre-licensing exam requirement. And I am happy to provide some context. In 2008, our pre-licensing requirement was amended to add a provision where for good cause, we could waive the pre-licensing requirement. And then in 2011, which was effective January 1, 2012, we actually eliminated the requirement altogether because as it turned out, there were a ton of people who petitioned the insurance department and presented a good cause explanation, which were individually reviewed and approved. And since these weren't decisions that frontline staff were authorized to make, the insurance commissioner actually reviewed each one. If you're taking notes, we have a couple of insurance bulletins that provide that legislative history: Insurance Bulletin 2008-11 and Insurance Bulletin 2011-7. So I guess from our perspective, we provided an avenue to hear exception requests for a requirement that an individual prove to the state that they studied before they took a licensing exam. And we heard those requests for a couple of years. And then we eliminated the requirement altogether, which in turn improved our licensing efficiency and, reduced the cost associated with obtaining a license. So as far as history and philosophy, I did talk to a lot of people over the last couple of weeks to ask some questions. I've been with the department for 10 years, but I wasn't actually at the department when it was implemented. And I learned a couple of things. So I learned that the elimination of PLE in Rhode Island, when it was proposed, there was significant concern among the aging community that people would not understand the importance to prepare for a licensing exam, and that they would just go in and either fail the test or pass with luck. So we promised to closely monitor exam performance at that time, and we did closely monitor it for a few years, and the exam performance stayed the same. So fast forward to today, I'm actually currently finishing up our own licensing exam review, And some of the folks on the panel have been around in Rhode Island for a while. And some providers in Rhode Island have actually seen a dramatic increase with the take rate of folks that sign up for their exam prep courses. So I'm not providing opinions from us. I'm just providing, the lay of the land here. And most people I actually spoke with saw the inherent value in taking the time to prepare for a test so they could pass it. And some people I talked to made the argument that there are many other licensed professions that don't have a PLE requirement. But I guess for us, you can see the trajectory in that we provided an avenue to provide, an exception that actually became overwhelming, I think, and then it was just eliminated. So
Okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. Sure.
So also I want to add that over the last year, we've been talking about this a lot. And because we're going through our exam performance development exercise right now, I'm actually going to be adding a couple of questions on our exam survey, just like the demographic kind of questions, 3 questions about the education level of the test taker, the number of hours that the test taker prepared, and the type of exam preparation, whether it was online, in person, et cetera. I just think that that's valuable information for a variety of reasons.
Yes. Yeah, it'd be great if that you could publish that at some point.
Yeah.
That's interesting information.
Right. Interesting information that could be valuable across the board, not necessarily something that Rhode Island wants to draw any conclusions from.
Sure. Okay, so talking about pass rates, do you collect pass rates? And if you do, what is the importance of those pass rates? Is it informational to you? Does it identify trends, or does it affect the education? Well, you don't have education, so does it affect your examination policy? Does it affect your exam reviews? I would say
it's not easy. That's not an easy question to answer, because we certainly have our pass rates, but in Rhode Island, we don't spend a lot of time analyzing our pass rates. We have of late, over the last 5 or 6 years, after the first few years of eliminating PLE happened, it has remained steady. There aren't any trends in any area. So I think that, we think the pass rates can be a measure of how hard or how easy an exam may be. And this is why it's ultra important for us to do our exam performance reviews. And, we spend a significant amount of time on those reviews. So, from our perspective, it could be an indicator of too hard or too easy.
Yeah. And there's no right answer here. We're just,
there's also no trends in either direction in Rhode Island. We're pretty status quo, which I think is okay.
Yeah. There's so many things that affect, pass rates that it's hard to say, right? All right. Have you noticed the number of applicants trending up or down? And how does this impact pass rates, if you've noticed, and if it has affected them?
I mean, we have had more license transactions in the last 12 months, like many other jurisdictions, than we have in quite some time. I think at one point we had 40% more consistently month after month. And I don't know if I don't know what the direct reason for that is. I'm sure it has something to do with the pandemic, but we have not seen any change in our exam performance, i.e. our pass rates.
All right.
So I don't know if it's affected it or not.
Sure. Well, thanks for sharing that information with us. We appreciate you being here.
I appreciate the ask. Always happy to help. Thank you very much for having me.
Sure. All right, next slide, and we will move on to Texas. And we will have Randall Evans join us from Texas.
Good afternoon, Barb. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm gonna start by showing just how smart I am by simply saying everything that Rachel said is what I'm gonna say.
That's not fair. That's not how it's.
I know.
So we already know, Texas doesn't have any, but can you share it with us, your philosophy? I mean, and you haven't been in the state of Texas long, and you came from Indiana, which did have a pre-licensing requirement. But is there anything that you can share with us about the philosophy or history behind Texas for producer. So I stuck in the word producer here,
Okay.
and not having any pre-licensing requirements.
So let me first just say that our pre-licensing requirements in Texas are only for adjuster. For our lines adjuster, they're required to have a 150 question exam, a 40-hour pre-licensing course. For property casualty and surety adjusters, same 150 question exam. And then for workers' compensation, they're required to just have a 60 question exam. Having had the experience in Indiana and Texas, I can kind of give you a variation. So first, let me agree with Rachel when she said, someone made a comment about the inherent value of having someone prepare not only for the exam, but for the industry that they're about to go into. Pre-licensing does that. And Indiana now found that to be the case. Here in Texas, pretty much the philosophy is, hey, you're smart enough to pass the exam, then you can get the
So that's the difference between exam prep and pre-licensing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Big difference. So in Indiana, we had pre-licensing for everything. Here in Texas, it's just limited to adjuster. I've seen both sides of the coin in terms of the value of having pre-licensing, as well as the understanding that maybe pre-licensing, given the industry that market that you're in, may not be as valuable or as necessary. So I've kind of seen both sides of the coin in that. My own personal opinion, I want people to be educated when they're selling me a product or when we're providing me a service in the insurance industry, but that's my personal philosophy.
Sure. Do you see, I've just thrown this out there, do you see anything changing with the adjuster, or is that not even, a thought?
We see that with the pre-licensing requirement for adjuster here in Texas, they have two options. Either they can take the state exam or they can take a pre-licensing course and take the exam of that provider. Often we see most adjusters will actually take a pre-licensing course and take the provider's exam over taking the state exam. So it's really an option for them to avoid taking the state exam. However, those provider exams are approved by the department as well.
So that's a good point. So if they take the state exam, then they don't have the same requirement.
Right.
Right.
But they are taking an exam that still has been reviewed and approved
Correct.
by the department.
Yes, that's a
Either way,
good point. Yeah.
Our hands in it. So.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks. Okay, so I do know that you do collect pass rates. So what is the importance and usefulness of the license exam pass rates? Is it just informational, or is it important for identifying trends, or is it affect education? Well, you don't have education requirements, but the examination policy?
I think it's both informational as well as being able to identify trends. Information wise, you want to be able to see how your exam is performing, depending on who your vendor is and how down in the weeds they get with regard to the performance of your exam. Oftentimes those pass rates and getting down to the specific detail of the question can tell you how a specific question is performing, as well as how your overall exam is performing as people are taking the exam. So I think it's definitely informational, but definitely comes in handy when it comes to your annual reviews or your exam reviews to determine if there's updates that need to be made due to legislative changes, or if there are corrections and edits or changes that need to be made to your exam due to low performing questions, or questions that may very well likely just be what I like to be called gimmies, where it's a question that, doesn't matter what the answer is, you've kind of given it to them by how the question was written. So.
Yeah. Right. Yes. And then there's the questions that they have to get right. How many hours of CE or something? we want you to get this one right.
Yeah. Or, if you think back to your days in school, as long as you got your name right, you got 5 points.
Right. All right. So same question as everyone else has had. Have you noticed the number of applicants trending up or down? And do you think that this has impacted pass rates?
We have seen a significant increase in applicants here in Texas. And I think there's a couple of different reasons for that. The pandemic forced people to choose. We've all been hearing about the great resignation, what I prefer to be called the great job movement. Like, these people that just quit and go sit on the beach, they chose another profession. They went to another industry. They decided to go work for another employer. So, the millions of the people that are part of the Great Resignation, they still have jobs. They just chose to go elsewhere. A good portion of those people chose the insurance industry. We've seen that in realization in the license applications that we've seen come to Indiana, come to Texas. For example, in 2020, we saw 552,000 licensees come across. In 2021, we saw 629,000 licenses, which is a difference of 77,000 or so licenses between the 2 years. And then in 2022, so far in April, we've already seen 639,000 licensees. So yes, we've seen a significant increase in licensees in Texas, folks trying their hand in the insurance industry. So your second question was, has that impacted pass-fail rates? Absolutely. The more people you see taking your exam, the more you're going to see your pass rates go one way or the other. We have the advantage in Texas of having the demographics for our exam. So we're able to get down to that minutia that Rachel mentioned in determining if you have college educated people taking your exam, if you have people who have 2-year college degree or less, GED, diploma, we're able to kind of get down to that minutia to see exactly who is actually taking our exam and how they're faring in that. Suffice it to say, 70% of the increase in our exam test takers have been people who have 2 years of college or less in their credentialing. So we've certainly seen a difference in our pass-fail rates. The fail rates have gone up because more people who are less educated or less prepared for the exam are not passing at a higher rate.
I love those statistics, and I know Cindy loves those too. So that's good news to hear that you have, that you are able to use those statistics.
Yeah, it's an advantage that we have in Texas, having our demographics as part of our exam. I know most states don't do that, but it's very beneficial to really kind of get an opportunity to see where you can make changes and how your exam as well as your licensing is impacted.
Preach. Yeah. I wish everybody, really, I wish every state collected this information. It would be so immensely helpful to understand who's coming into, the industry and how they're preparing to do that.
Yeah,
well,
spoiler.
It helps you answer the question beyond, have you seen more people taking your exam? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You can explain more of who is taking it, how they're performing, and then what the results of their performance is. So the demographics, I certainly recommend anyone to have that additional detail in your reporting, so you have more information to make more informed decisions about your exam as well as your licensing practices.
Yeah, that's a spoiler alert, because that's definitely something that we want to look at on the next webinar that we have is the data that you're talking about and how that can be utilized. So I'm glad that you did bring that information up. So thanks again for joining us, Randall. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
So sure, we want to hop on over to Louisiana, which is right by Texas. So let's have Lori Gazer join us, please.
Okay. You just want me to dive right in?
Well, let's go ahead with that first question. What is the history? And I know that you are going to be brutally honest with us. So what is the history and philosophy behind pre-licensing requirements in Louisiana?
Well, I tried to find out exactly when we put pre-licensing into place. And the oldest version of the code that we have here in licensing goes back to 1988. And it was in the code then. So it's been here a minute. But I'm going to tell you, it's not going to matter very much after August 1st, because just prior to the start of our legislative session, industry approached us about considering the repeal of pre-licensing education, and our commissioner agreed. House Bill 545 was introduced. It has passed the Louisiana House committees and the full House. It has passed Senate Insurance and is actually on the agenda today for the final passage in the Louisiana State Senate. Assuming it passes, everything has been favorable so far. Once the governor signs it after passage, it will take effect on August 1st. The only opposition that we had to this bill came from the bail bond industry, because bail is apparently special. They had an 8-hour pre-licensing course that was actually kind of built into this apprenticeship program we have. You have to apprentice for 3 months before you can apply for the bail bond license. Because they felt that was integral to their apprentice program, they asked to have that kind of exempted. So amendment was put in to preserve the bail training, but that was the only group that really had anything to say about this bill. We got all green cards at all the committee meetings. So like what tipped our hat on this? What was our convincing point? And it really was the lack of difference in the test scores between states that had pre-licensing and states that didn't. Honestly, we hadn't looked at that previously. We were just kind of along about how we've always done it since apparently 1988. So we really hadn't examined that too much. But I will say, like, personally, I always questioned why we had pre-licensing for our producers. But when we introduced adjuster licensing in 2007, our adjusters had no pre-licensing requirement. And actually, our test scores for our adjusters exams always tended to trend a little bit higher than our producers. So finding no negligible difference in the test scores, we found that it just didn't mandate that we require a packaged formal pre-licensing education program, that the applicant should have a choice in how they spend their time and their money in preparing for the exam. Now, the underlying belief is they are still going to have to prepare for the exam. There's just too much information on there to walk off the street and pass it. But the choice and how you go about that was what we really determined should be the way we're going to go. So once that passes, I will certainly have that confirmation sent out through the SILA channels.
Well, this has just been worth the hours spent.
Bombshell after bombshell.
I'm telling you, man, this is worth our SILA membership just in the 2 states right here. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about pass rates.
Okay. I really don't want to, but I will.
No, just talking about importance. All right, the importance and
important.
usefulness. So do you collect them? And if you do, what do you use with the data? Is it just informational? Do you look at trends? Does it affect, well, now it may not affect education, but what about, examination information?
We do collect it and we do look at it. I mean, obviously you have to have some objective criteria in determining the license qualification. So the exam is that important objective metric. So having the pass rates are important because they're, but I want to say it's a good place for us it's a place to start when you're doing an evaluation. One thing that we need to look at when you're looking at your pass rate is the exam serving its purpose. The purpose is to verify that that new person entering the field has the minimum competency to do their job. So is your test too difficult, meaning you're setting a standard higher than what that minimum entry should be? Or is your test too easy, meaning you're setting that bar a little bit lower than what's necessary? Now, I know in the past couple years, our local industry, both in the life and health and the property casualty arenas, have voiced concerns about the need to recruit more people into the insurance industry, just by the aging out of the profession. We're all old in the insurance industry, and getting young blood in has apparently been difficult. And one of the things that they consistently bring up in our agent advisory meetings is the difficulty of the exam. So one of the things I've been doing in my spare time, and we all know as regulators how much spare time we have, starting to look at what the Louisiana exam is compared to other states' exams. And actually what I've found, there's not a whole lot of consistency in what our test covers. It's all across the board and how many questions are on the test, what topics are covered on the test, the number of questions on each topic on the exams. So I wonder if that might be the next thing down the road that we as an industry look at, is maybe, are we all testing the same things? Or when we're comparing a test or pass rates in Louisiana to pass rates in another state, are we really doing apples to apples comparison?
Right.
And I think that's obviously a future conversation, but something I think we might all need to think about.
definitely. Okay, so talking about the number of applicants, have you noticed the number trending up, down?
5
And-
major hurricanes. I can't keep up with the number of applicants that are coming in. So we're not even going to talk about the anomaly of the amount of adjusters we've issued. So I'm going to focus just on the producers, and there's been a significant number. In our fiscal year 1920, we issued 32,000 new producer licenses. About 3,500 of those were residents. Last fiscal year 2021, we were up to 49,000 new producer licenses, and about 5,000 of those were residents. And I'm going to echo the same thing that Texas said before. Economic downturns, the disruptions from COVID, there were a lot of people making new life choices. One, economic downturns, people have always turned to insurance. Insurance is a professional career that has one of the lowest barriers to entry to get into the business. Plus, the insurance world tended to be very work from home friendly. So those two reasons, I think, drew a lot of people to dip their toes into the insurance world and get their producer license. Plus the aging of the profession, there's been a lot of heavy recruiting to draw people in. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we're seeing these significantly high increases. But I do think that does take a toll on the testing and just trying to figure it out. I don't know what the answer is, what the reason is. We did see a downtrend on our test scores, not huge, but they did decline over the past 12 months. And I'm wondering if it is because it is drawing more people from areas or other careers that may not have considered insurance, kind of testing the waters out, that's kind of swaying that. And if this is going to stabilize after a while, but it's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on.
Great. Well, it has been a pleasure talking to you, and especially when you drop bombshells.
I was waiting for that.
Yes, you were. Great. All right, so I am going to turn it over to Cindy Davidson, and you can go ahead and move on to our next date.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Lori, for the giant bomb you just dropped on everybody. So on to Christina Hunter from North Carolina, who will be joining us for the next set of questions. Christina, are you live and on?
Hello, everybody.
Great, awesome. So we're going to start with and I know North Carolina has a producer licensing, pre-licensing education requirement. Why don't you share with us what is the history and philosophy behind those requirements for North Carolina?
North Carolina passed their legislation probably back in 1987 in regards to pre-licensing requirements. During that time, up until the end of 2007, we issued a combination license with property and casualty and life and health. And applicants were required to take 40 hours of pre-licensing and then pass a combined exam to get a license. So with the uniform standards that came about as of January 2008, we split everything out, so it's all separate. And then, it's 20 hours per line, and then there's a separate exam for each line of authority. And that's the way that we've had it since then.
And how do those requirements differ for producers versus adjusters?
For adjusters, we do not have a pre-licensing requirement. We suggest that applicants take the property and casualty agent course, if they need some education. But most can just, apply and go ahead and pass, and try and pass the state exam.
Got it. Yeah, adjuster licensing still kind of the Wild West.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I know SILA and NAIC are trying to get their arms around some more uniformity and reciprocity there. So in North Carolina, Christina, what's the importance and usefulness of the exam pass rates? How do you look at them, review them? Do you just use them for information, or are you using them to actually impact your education and exam policies?
We do look at them for information as well, using them to identify trends, and they do also affect the education and exam policies because we do review our exams on an annual basis to determine, you know, if the questions on the exam are still relevant, and if there's any new legislation that passes or any other new information, if we need to develop questions to cover those areas. And a lot of the PLE providers, you know, look at the pass rates to see where they stand, you know, themselves, and compare themselves to other providers to see that, you know, everybody's basically on the same plane. And, you know, nobody is doing, well, they would mainly look to see if they're doing worse as, you know, than anybody else. So we do look at those pass rates, and a lot of other people look at those pass rates as well.
Very good. Awesome. And have you noticed in your state the number of applicants trending up and down? It sounds like everyone else is seeing an upward trend. Is that also true in your state?
It is also true in North Carolina that we've seen an upward trend over the past year, and, you know, echoing what others have said in regards to, you know, the economic downturn and things with COVID, you know, now it's starting to bounce back, you know, where people are coming back to the insurance industry, and we've seen an uptick in applications.
Interesting. And does that impact your pass rates at all, or have you not?
It doesn't really affect the pass rates that much. But of course, you know, the more people that take the exam, it'll fluctuate a little bit, but it's not going to be a major change. It really stays consistent.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I think we're going to switch to the next slide, and it's time to put Kevin Schlautman from Nebraska in the hot seat. So hoping Kevin is unmuted and ready to join in the conversation. So what would you say, how would you describe the history and philosophy behind pre-licensing education in Nebraska? I know Nebraska recently lifted those.
Yes, well, I had to do a little digging to find the history part of it. The oldest thing I could find on it after I did some digging was the pre-licensing requirement was adopted possibly back in 1993. And it was kind of the standard, as far as I could tell, the 20-hour per line for most of our license types, the major lines of authority. And it seemed to have remained mostly unchanged with those standards until July 19th of 2018. And at that point, Nebraska actually appealed that requirement. So we stopped requiring the pre-licensing. And then kind of some of the logic or some of the thought behind that was a lot of the pre-licensing courses that we had, they were older. They were approved 15 and sometimes longer than 15 years ago. And we didn't require renewals. So that was kind of a one-off. And we didn't do regular renewals or reviews, I'm sorry, of the material either. So the course material, we thought in some cases just wasn't the same quality across the board. You had some carriers that were definitely, you know, making the changes based on our, you know, regular reviews of the exam information and updating the information, and then other ones that were not. They were using possibly old information and outdated information, and we were getting feedback on that. So that was kind of one of the reasons for it. And then another one kind of had to do with our process. Our process, I don't know, maybe had a little flaw in it. The validation or proof of the pre-licensing was not required or not validated before the examination. It was actually validated when they were applying for the license. So we had a lot of circumstances where individuals had passed the exam, or maybe they were applying to add the line of authority, and then they went to apply for that license, and it was, they weren't able to, or they were informed that they needed to now do pre-licensing. So basically they'd already passed the exam, and then they had to go back and do the pre-licensing. So the process itself was, like I said, it had maybe a flaw in it, and it was just not, it turned out not to be the best situation when we had to inform people that they had to do pre-licensing after the fact.
Yeah, that's
So
always
it's kind
fun. That's always fun, right? So it sounds like
my God, yeah.
you've gotten some process improvements. Any other outcomes to share with states who might be thinking about doing the same thing?
No, I think those were some of the main ones there. I think some of the probably the advantages for us, or the maybe not even for us, but the main advantage, I think, was just more of a simplified process for both the providers and the license applicants. Obviously, we still encourage the applicants to study for the exam, and they're still doing that. I mean, it's not like once we took this away, they stopped studying. They're still studying for the exam. The only difference is now that we don't, we give them that freedom to choose how to study, or the method they want to do, and we don't regulate that part of it. They kind of just give them the freedom to do that.
And so, having recently made that change, how are you looking at pass rates, and how are you using that information now?
Well, one thing with the change, we did kind of go back and compare the pass rates, before having the pre-licensing requirement, and then not having the pre-licensing. We monitored that very closely. We actually went and we did a comparison of that for quite some time. And I pulled the results here and kind of looked at them again. And for, like the 3 years prior to us getting rid of the requirement, and the 3 years after us getting rid of the requirement, the pass rates really were the same. So it kind of tells you that, it didn't really have an effect on how people were doing on the exams. I think that's kind of been echoed by other states as well. When they looked at states that didn't have the pass, or didn't have the pre-licensing requirement compared to states that did. I mean, it doesn't seem like, the pass rate is affected too much by that.
Awesome. Okay, last question. Have you noticed the number of applicants trending up or down, and how does that impact pass rates, if at all?
We have seen a pretty steady increase in our applications, and especially during last year, we saw a pretty steep increase in the applications, more toward kind of the probably third quarter of last year. Took a steep increase on the applications, probably for the same reasons that everybody's indicated, with the pandemic and stuff like that. So far, I think those numbers have kind of leveled out maybe a little bit. They're definitely not increasing as much as they were last year. They're still on the rise, just not to that degree. As far as them affecting our pass rates, I don't know, our pass rates seem to be kind of a roller coaster ride. They fluctuate month to month and line to line. I haven't seen too much direct correlation between the pass rates and the number of people or number of applications. Just kind of seems like it's pass rates on average have been pretty steady, regardless of the large increase in the applicants.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Super interesting to hear from a state that's recently gone through a downshift in pre-licensing education. So thanks for spending time with us and sharing that information. And now I think we're going to move to Mr. Richard Tozer from Virginia.
Hello, everyone.
He's back online after you had
Yes.
a little bit of a rocky day on getting online today, right? So we're glad you were able to join us on camera. So share with us, because I know you have thoughts about this, the history, philosophy between pre-licensing, behind pre-licensing in Virginia.
Sure. So like a lot of states, we used to have pre-licensing education, but in 2001, which became effective in 2002, we repealed pre-licensing education as part of our big push towards becoming compliant with the PLMA and the subsequent uniform licensing standards. And like a lot of states, we discussed this internally for a long period of time to decide whether or not pre-licensed education would impact pass rates. And obviously we were pleased to see, as we closely monitored pass rates subsequent to 2002, that they really didn't have an impact on our pass rates. So therefore, our philosophy was, most people who take the exam seriously, who want to get into the industry, will do some form of pre-licensing education. And we actually do track that on our exam survey. Like Randall in Texas, we have a comprehensive survey at the end of our exams. And some of those questions include, your exam preparation, as well as the number of hours that you studied. And I'm pleased to report about 90% of our candidates do some form of pre-licensing education before taking the exam. And about 80% of those candidates at least take about 30 hours of pre-licensing education. And so therefore we note that, our pass rates were not impacted by making it a requirement, because most candidates would still do pre-licensing education of one sort or another.
So you are keeping a close eye on exam pass rates and identifying to use that for information. Does it impact your exam policies at all?
In the sense of, well, yes, but obviously the more information we have from the survey, along with our annual exam review, when we look at each question in the poll and look for bias and pass rates, difficulty level, that p-value that we will love to talk about at our exam reviews, it does have some impact. But to be honest, we really look at the questions themselves to determine whether or not those questions are a good question or a bad question. And we throw out any questions that are obviously are too easy or too hard, as the case may be.
And have you noticed in Virginia the number of applicants trending up like other states are reporting?
Without a doubt, last year was a banner year for the agent licensing teams in Virginia. We had a little over 96,000 applications, about 30% increase over 2020. And our ratios are about 9-to-1 that year, 9 non-residents for every 1 resident. But overall, our current 365,000 active licenses is about a 5-to-1 ratio.
Amazing.
And I would like to add that we do track other trends on our surveys as well, which I think adds some weight to what some other states had already discussed. We look at education levels, as well as if English is your first language. We also look at the age of the candidates as well. And what we noted is that those who have a high school education only, they pass rates about 45%. But if you have some college to 4 years of college, we get up into the early 70s for pass rates. And we also note that candidates who are older tend to do better than the younger candidates. And personally, I equate that to just studying habits and life's experiences. Generally speaking, they seem to be better prepped for taking the exam.
Interesting. So I think I can already forecast a future discussion point would be the demographics and data points that some states are collecting, and maybe other states might want to think about, because that's some amazing data and demographics you're able to share there, Richard, because of those post-exam surveys.
Well, we post all this on our website, Cindy. So if anyone's interested, they can go to the Bureau's website. We post the full survey results and we put it into a very easy readable format.
Fantastic.
We also publish school pass rates as well, so candidates can look and see which schools tend to do a little better than others when it comes to passing the exam. we do note that when we publish a new exam annually, there is a lag time between when the exam's published and when exam pass rates start to trend towards normal pass rates. We do see a dip simply because I think there's a lag between when the new exams are published and when the new materials are updated by companies or the pre-licensing educators.
Absolutely. And that would be another great thing to discuss on our next one. All right. Thank you, Richard. That was excellent.
Hey, before Richard
Yeah.
leaves, I just want to thank him for matching the Virginia postcard, since his
Yes.
outfit and the background is exactly the same color
Pretty
as
awesome.
the Virginia postcard.
Pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So thanks for
Very
coordinating
on point. We
that.
love that. All right, let's move on to Holly Kinney and Dawn Ward from California. Thank you so much for being with us. And I know California has an unusual pre-licensing education requirement because there's some additional hours in there. So why don't you share with us what the history is behind that?
Thank you, Cindy. So you guys get a tag team from California. You get me and you get Dawn. I know we're short on time, so I'm going to try to say this as quickly as possible. I'm going to answer the first couple of questions and Dawn will answer the second set. So basically, we have a 20-hour pre-licensing requirement. It's stated in our insurance code that took effect in 1992. And then we had regulations that further defined pre-licensing that took effect in 93. So our pre-licensing requirements meet the NAIC's PLMA and the Uniform Licensing Standards to ensure that all applicants essentially meet California's pre-licensing education standards. We also require new license applicants and the non-residents who are moving to California as a resident to complete the 12-hour ethics and California Insurance Code pre-licensing education. This is all in addition to the 20 hours. So this has been a part of the educational objectives since 1993, and it aligns pretty tightly with California's vision, mission, and goal of overall consumer protection. The one additional requirement we have for pre-licensing is that applicants must complete 100% of their pre-licensing education, and that's stated in some of our regulations. We also have another option, and that is for licensed applicants who speak Spanish as their primary language. They have the option to take the life series, so life and/or accident, health, or sickness, or the life limited to the payment of funeral and burial expenses. They can take those exams in Spanish. We currently have a 37% Spanish language first time pass rate, which is kind of on par, I believe, with other states that have that option as well. Basically, our goal is to ensure that all these licensed applicants have the knowledge needed to serve California consumers and be well educated on the California Insurance Code and applicable ethical standards. I mean, that's really the bottom line. I also would like to note that although pre-licensing education is not required for independent adjusters, life and disability insurance analysts, and the life limited license applicants, California does provide examination objectives, which is like a study guide to prepare for and be aware of California's requirements. So, and then I'll go on to the curriculum board. I know we're tight on time. I apologize. Okay, so our curriculum board is commissioner appointed. Their role is to oversee the development of pre-licensing, a statutorily required continuing education for agents, brokers, bail agents, and insurance adjusters, including a list of pre-approved courses of study and courses of study for professional designations. They also develop standards for education providers and instructors of pre-licensing and continuing education courses, programs, and seminars. They meet 3 times a year and they serve a 3-year term. They always meet in the third Thursday in the months of February, July, and October. And the appointed members consist of representatives of insurance agents, brokers, life agents, trade associations, representatives of insurance companies, consumer groups, bail agents, and insurance adjusters. And I hope I did that quick enough.
You were great.
On time.
Boom. All right, Dawn's turn.
Dawn's turn.
Yeah, you guys take your time. That's all right. We don't want to rush you. Yep,
Okay.
you're fine.
I don't know.
Uh-oh, where's Dawn?
I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So just lost my since we're rushing through this, let's see. So basically for the importance and usefulness of the exam rates, in California, we closely monitor the examination rates on a monthly basis to determine what are significant increases or decreases in those rates. The examination results help us understand what pre-licensing curriculum in the educational objectives or the examination objectives may need to be revised or updated. When we update the objectives, we work closely with PSI, our examination vendor, to either schedule the examination workshop or work with PSI's examination liaison to review the questions and ensure that the distractors are not too similar to the correct answer. In addition, the examination pass rates indicate if the examination questions need to be reviewed based on emerging trends in the industry.
Study guide and be aware of requirements.
Can you hear me okay?
So and then I'll go. Good morning. I know we're apologize. Okay, apologize.
Okay, so
somebody needed to mute. You're good.
I think we're muted. Okay, so currently in California, we provide its license examination pass rates at each of the curriculum board meetings. And then for the next question, have you noticed the number of applicants trending up or down, and how does this impact the education pass rates, if at all? So for California, yes, we've had a 19% increase from 2020 to 2021 in the number of license applications received. In addition, during the same time period, the number of license examinations administered has increased 9%. However, in 2020, we did see a notable decrease in April, May, and June due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which created a lack of available test center locations. And once California had requested PSI reopen their test centers and the remote online proctored license examinations were launched, the number of examinations increased. So in 2021, we also saw a gradual increase in the number of examinations administered to the 9% previously noted. And this is due to the social distancing requirements being less restrictive, to the seating in the testing centers increasing, and the availability of the remote online proctored testing. And in 2022, we were seeing similar numbers of the examinations administered in the months of January through March for 2021. And we also recently launched the new property and casualty education objectives, which we're now starting to see those examination results improving. So ultimately, overall in 2020, 21, and 22, the California pass rates remained relatively the same. And then I also just wanted to add a quick note at the end is that California also provides the examination statistics as well as the demographics in our annual report, the California annual report. So before we go to the next slide, I just want to touch back and see if Holly had anything she wanted to add.
No, I think just to differentiate, so we saw that 19% increase in the license applications. I think that's, and then only a 9% in examinations, people taking examinations. And I think that's largely due to non-residents applying with California. So that's the difference there.
Fantastic. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for speeding through that. Sorry, it's always hard to go last. We really appreciate everyone being here today. I think we have a lot of state annual reports to read as homework or something. So lots of work to do. I want to encourage everyone to think about attending the National Education Conference, which will be live and in person in Seattle, Washington in October. I know we're going to keep talking.
You muted, Cindy.
Wow, how'd that happen?
I don't know. Yes.
I was trying to send a message. Don't forget to add questions you'd like to see addressed in a future webinar on this topic. You can send them in the chat. You can send them to Barb and I, but we will definitely be continuing this conversation and learning all kinds of new and interesting things along the way. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we hope to have, we hope maybe sometime toward the end of summer, but we also hope to talk about this topic at the conference. So yeah, if you haven't registered yet, we really want you to register so that you can be part of that conversation in person. Definitely it's important. So please, if you have questions or if you have something that you want us to address on a future webinar, please go ahead and add that. And if you can't think of anything now, please send an email to Diana Cates at what is her email? dcapes@sila.org. There it is in the chat. Like I don't text, I don't email that every day, right? Thanks everyone for joining.
Good to see everybody.
And
Bye.
thank you again to all of our regulators. We really appreciate
Yeah,
that.
thanks you guys. You made it.
Are you
made it happen.
emailing? Are